Well, good morning and welcome to Vision in Action Live. We have a presentation today on behavioral psychology and a discussion with Mark Platten, co-founder of Alexander Platten Associates and a multi-book author. Welcome, Mr. Platten. It's a pleasure to have you here on Vision in Action Live. I'm Jim Boswell, your host and the author of Lifetime Long Fulfillment, Take Charge of Your Life. So today's presentation is going to be on behavioral psychology, something I think you'll find very interesting. This discussion addresses the emotional and logical behaviors as observed in humans by Dr. Kahneman, who is a Nobel Prize winner in psychology. Let's see how this applies to us. If you look at the information on your screen, we're going to start at the top, and I'm going to posit to you that Dr. Kahneman's information separates our performance in the way we address the world into two brains in one body. And these two brains are somewhat on different wavelengths, doing different things, and have the potential to help each other, but also great potential to cause confusion, tension, and to cripple us from making good decisions. So in a summary, the system one brain is our instinctual brain. These are rules we live by. These are the ones we grow up with. These are our evolutionary survival habits and the way our brain works in real time. The system two level brain is our analytical one, and it can improve our perceptions. It can in fact favor factual information over fiction. And it can help us conduct analyses of situations and data, and it can help us deal with a greater level of complexity than our day-to-day lives. And it can help us with effective decision making. However, it too is also at risk for inherent biases. So for system two brain to come into play, we have to learn to pause for that. And we'll get into that in a little further detail down the line. So just to back up a little bit, if you're interested in this, Thinking Fast and Slow is the book by Daniel Kahneman. He published this in 2011, and Kahneman's been in this business for probably on the order of 50 years, and he just died this last year. He used to work with another doctor, Amos Tversky, who is also deceased. But they're foremost contributors, and Dr. Kahneman's Nobel Prize is in economics. I misspoke about it being in psychology. So the book here sorts through the human behaviors based on the system one and system two brain theory. And I want to introduce you to more details about that. So let's go back to system one brain. This is automatic, it's quick, it's instinctual. For instance, flight or fright reaction in human beings is an instinctual reaction to physical harm or threat. And it's fairly effortless, and it doesn't take a lot of voluntary control. So in your common language, it might be referred to as your gut. And oh, by the way, it's always on, up to and including, when you're asleep. So this particular part of your brain deals with your feelings, your emotions, your impressions of the world and things around you, your ability to recognize patterns, and your associative recall. So your memory actually flows through your system one brain. And sometimes this can actually be inaccurate. It can also be very much subject to different biases called priming, halo effects, and interference. And it's really insensitive to quality and quantity, and another set of biases called framing effects and an individual person's world model. And it operates in the term of not what you see is what you get, the old Apple phrase, but what you see is all there is. So it doesn't really comprehend a lot of exterior information. So system one competencies, it's really good at depth perception, simple mathematics, sound orientation, so it's managing your hearing and everything, And reading large billboards, automatic spoken phrase completions, driving a car on an empty road, which many of us know is almost automatic, disgust reactions that you may have to things and actions and so forth, strong moves in chess, oddly enough, and detection of hostility is part of the System 1 brain. And simple sentences are also System 1 derivatives. So let's look at System 2 brain. System 2 brain improves our ability to exercise informed choice. It allows us to concentrate on something. It's not a knee-jerk reaction. And it allows us to act in a better fashion. So to do that, it has to deny the prominence of System 1 brain with logic, thought, and computation. And these decisions are not bound by what you see is all there is, because we're actually developing more information. It's factual, and it's integrated and analyzed. So the System 2 brain, unfortunately, is a little lazy because it's a lot easier to let the System 1 brain conclusions dominate the conversation. That really doesn't help us because we don't get as much information into our processing. We get instinct. So we have to pause the System 1 brain long enough for System 2 logic to take hold. And System 2 initiates System 1 memory search, as I mentioned before earlier, to do hypothesize and analysis and things like that. And physically, that's a period when your pupils dilate and your heart rate increases. The problem is System 1 brain memory may not be untainted. It may be actually at risk. So you may be invoking bad data into a System 2 process. Let's take a look a little further. So what is System 2 competencies? Bracing for the starter gun in a race, computing the letter A in a given text, attention to circus clowns, telling someone a phone number, hearing one voice in a crowded room, parking in a narrow space, looking for a woman with white hair, comparing values between similar objects, searching memory for a surprising sound, filling out your taxes every year, faster than normal walking speed, checking the validity of a series of complex logic statements, and monitoring appropriate behavior in a social setting. So you can see that there's a lot more to those situations than a System 1 brain might handle. So these interactions actually drive our behaviors. The problem is that some of our behaviors are subject to bias, intensity, reframing an answer to deliver on an easier question, not the one that was asked, and one's own personal likes and dislikes. So Bayesian logic, which is based on probable action and probable reasoning, is really effective only in System 2, but it's a pretty hard thing to comprehend and to effect. But it's a factual-based type of logic. So the question is, who or what do you want ruling your life? System 1, System 2, or the intersection between the two where you're going to be anyway? And what are the limitations on doing it that way? If you're System 1 oriented and you're happy with that, on the Maslow's hierarchy of scale, you're liable to be able to reach the point in the middle where you're simply happy, because happy has a large emotional component. It is instinctual to a great extent. System 2 logic is almost imperative for you to reach to fulfillment and further your pursuit of wisdom. So what you need to look out for is biases. And we don't have time to go through all these in detail. The book will talk to it. But sometimes you'll let your confidence exceed reasonable doubt. This is something you don't want to be doing. It's a bias. To allow less information being a more in pursuit of a sure thing, a la if you're betting on a raffle. The belief that the validity of small numbers has evidence which actually denies logic. This goes against the regression to the mean in a large data population, which is a statistical concept, but it means we're taking a small set of numbers and letting that be real instead of looking at the large set of numbers. And where causes override statistics. We want to do something so badly that we ignore or disregard the statistics that are available, and we bet on the very improbable thing happening. And surprise, surprise, we're disappointed when that happens. Anchoring availability and other things like that and risks can also come into biasing. Overconfidence is a bias. Stereotyping is a bias. Poor forecasting of unexpected satisfaction. In other words, not detailing what constitutes satisfaction in a given instance and what's the probability of being able to achieve that. And incorporating representative correlation. Inaccurate. So in the end, what you got to think about when you think in Kahneman's system is system one instinct may well save your life. In a crash in a car or something like that, it's your instinct that's going to save your life. It won't be your system two logic because it takes too long to kick in. System two logic, though, has a great potential to improve on your gut reaction, on your prejudices, your emotions, and your management of the risk of failure. It will let you and help you prefer facts to fictions. And we do a little bit better on decision making when we're calm enough and take time enough to look at the facts of a situation and to dispel fictions and emotions. And it allows you to question, research, analyze, hypothesize, and test. And these are all critical capabilities for working on your own personal development and your own fulfillment. And it feeds results into that personal development. So for further on this, we have a short newsletter called Behavioral Psychology. It's on the website, and it has the details in case you don't want to read the full book. And that newsletter will go through all of this in a little bit more detail. We have a podcast, as you see here. We have FAQs and a lot more at the website, lifelongfulfillment.com. Much of this is free. Please feel free to use it at any point. And now is the time in Vision and Action when we entertain perspectives of point solutions, subject matter experts, and people leading self-directed lives. Today's discussion is going to be on growing one's personal development over time. So please join me in welcoming Mark Platten. He's the co-founder of Alexander Platten Associates and the author of Hay House Book Writers Book Camp Manual. He's worked in the U.S. Air Force on technology like GPS, at the U.S. Forest Service doing projects there, and at Vitalex doing ecology assessments, and now at APA advising on personal development in and around business. Mr. Platten, we're really pleased to have you. Welcome to Vision in Action Live today.
Thank you. It's been great to be here.
Well, I gave the most brief of introductions. Maybe there's some other critical items you'd like our audience to know about. So please carry on with that, and let's make sure they know, your background a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll fill in a couple of gaps there. For the last 16 years, I've been working as faculty at Colorado State University Extension. And so I just recently, on June 30th of 2024 here, stepped out of it. So I'm in this interesting new phase of life and people are asking me if have retired. It's like, well, no, I'm just moving on to the next phase of life. And it's interesting how those come about, right? So for me, I when I'm complete with something, it's really that clear signal is like it's time to move on and do the next thing.
Right.
And then also I'm an author, as you mentioned there with stuff, and my book is called The Art of Connecting with Nature. So something really different than the university. It's about how do we actually connect in nature in a more kind of centered and grounded way. And so the really different worlds, one academic, one more spiritually based, but they, as you mentioned earlier before we started this conversation, I'm kind of in this interesting crossroads of bringing both kind of worlds together.
Right. Well, that sounds like an interesting challenge.
It certainly
So,
can be.
you've hit a lot of different milestones and gone in, a lot of different directions, it appears, in your career. And maybe that influences where you are today. And I'm sure you've had some challenges along the way. So, what was that like in your major employment situations?
Yeah, I would say, interestingly, early on in my career, I was very fortunate as a young Air Force officer to actually just kind of plug into certain things, and finances came really easy to me, and it was I had like the golden parachute. Everything I touched seemed to
Hmm.
turn to gold. Um, I spent 7 years in the Air Force and then got out, opened up three small businesses that were doing well, and then started investing in this thing called penny stocks. And if you ever seen the Wolf of Wall Street kind of stuff, I was making all kinds of money. In fact, I think it was sometime in September of '96, I made $101,000 on paper in one day. It was like, oh my gosh, this is like I'm well on my way to becoming a multimillionaire with things. It was what was dancing in my head. And a year later, I had filed for bankruptcy. I'd lost every single. I mean, I woke up one morning, and I had three different stock sites I was checking, and I was smart. I had diversified my stocks into four or five different into different companies and stuff. So I was diversified that way. But I woke up and everything was reading zeros on all four or five stocks, and it's like, obviously that side is down. I went on the second one, zeros. Then I started becoming worried. I looked at the third one, it's like all zeros. And that's that whole Wolf of Wall Street stuff where the SEC came in and closed them down, which then led to me losing literally everything. Almost $380,000 I lost there. Ended up losing my home, losing cars, losing having to file for bankruptcy, and it was a real shock to the system. Right, that place of really interestingly, the low kind of point was not necessarily the loss of the stuff or the money. It was the loss of there was quite a few people who were relying on me for what I was doing and being in the financial kind of instigation or foundation for them. And so I
Right.
felt like I let down friends and family and cohorts that were really. I was looking at opening up a restaurant, a large restaurant here in Colorado Springs, and I had ran out of, once the money was gone, the money was gone. It's like, I can't back this. And so we lost that too. So it wasn't even the stuff that was the hard part of the dollars, although that was certainly tough. It was the relationships that were, I felt
Right.
like I let people down.
Hmm.
So I came back out of that and re-engineered myself from that, and then went on more the natural resources path, which is where I went and worked for the U.S. Forest Service. I got another degree in
Right.
natural resources. I kind of refocused myself. I grew up on a farm in eastern Iowa, just a short hop, skip, and jump from A Field of Dreams, for those who know what that movie is.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So I grew up on a small farm there. So I was really kind of getting a little bit more back to my roots of connecting into the nature of things, if you will, and hence the book that came from that as well. And then spent 15 years doing international work for large 100 to $700 million developments. And then for the last, like I said, 16 years at the university, really my forte has been helping people around the natural resource field. So from that kind of interesting massive loss came this kind of blooming of something different in me.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're the very model of resiliency then.
Well, I'm not sure the model would be the right place with that, but yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, everybody has their issue along the way, and man, that's a heck of a bounce back. So
Yeah, yeah.
plaudits to you, sir.
Thank you.
So, what are some of the key things you might have learned along the way that, our audience might be wanting to pay attention to?
Well, I would say that there's a level of grace that happens in that loss, right? So it's easy to be at the king of my mansion, of, if you will, and having all, like I said, everything I touch go to gold, and then look at everybody else and go, well, why can't you do this? This is easy. I do it, you can do it, right? And there's a lot of people who say that. I pulled myself up, I made myself I happen to have this thing and I did great. But what happens when you have these difficulties is that it gives you a certain understanding of where other people are. At least for me, it gave me a real grace for them, a real understanding that things happen, right? It could
Right.
be like for me that this happened, that I made maybe some bad decisions, but based on the information I had, seemed like a good decision. Everything I was touching was 20,000 here, 50,000 there, 100,000. It was like magic almost. But this place of going down and going to the as low as you can go in certain ways gave me this understanding of where we as humanity are, right? Where we can, where like we're basically this, we can tumble from this high, from our pedestals at any moment. And can we, at when we're at our low, how do we operate from that? How can I operate from that? Can I still be a kind, giving, loving person? Can I realize that it's not about the stuff, it's about the relationships, is where the depth is, and the character. And from that also gave me the understanding that I can reinvent myself, and that sometimes the if I'm willing to look at the gold that is in the downfall, instead
Hmm.
of focus on the loss and what could have been, and how I was taken advantage of, and how, I mean, my dad was that way. He spent his entire life up till the day he died talking about how this person had done him wrong and how this thing had gone badly. And I wanted to change that focus for me, Jim. I wanted it to be different, that my focus was on, I know that this happened, but I don't want to live the rest of my life in that lack, or in that, and being angry and disappointed about that, and being, hunting down the people who wronged me, right? So
Right.
could I forgive and move on and see where the blessing and the gifts were? And for me, the gift was going back to the more natural environment, working in the natural environment, whether it's managing forest or managing projects or helping
Hmm.
people through the university of understand the knowledge of being a good steward of the land. And that has been a much richer life in so many ways than what I could possibly ever have imagined. I would, way different than being an owner of a restaurant or multiple restaurants or stuff like that, where my soul wasn't really plugged into it. So it really gave me my soul back in a certain way.
Right. Right. Well, coming out of the Air Force, did you know you might wind up doing what you're doing now, or have you developed
No,
that over time?
no, I mean, I didn't at all, because it was, I had all this money, and it's like, well, I'm going to start some small businesses.
Sure.
And then I had worked in my undergraduate degree, and in between things, I'd done some restaurant stuff. And it's like,
Mhm.
and my wife and some friends at the time were into the restaurant business. Like, well, everybody does a restaurant, right? You've got money, you do a restaurant. It seems to be a thing. So it's like, if all these other people are doing it, surely I can do it. I've at least worked in the industry. And so that's where I was heading. That's what we were looking at. And we had some great designers on board, and great menu, and some of the best, people in the state on our team. And that all kind of came to crashing halt once that lost all that money. So yeah, no, I didn't know this is where it
Yeah.
was going to take me.
Yeah. Okay. So sounds like, you know, coping with the lessons learned of, failing, but failing is learning. We all learn something from
Absolutely.
that. And then it's, kind of the resiliency track of choosing something that obviously you thought you were close to, and you changed your whole lifestyle. That's pretty impressive. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how do you translate this? You talk about, I think, in your profile, that mentoring others through your associates organization to help instill these same sorts of capabilities in the folks that you help. Maybe you can talk a little bit to us about that.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I think one of the, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people, or maybe it's just those of us who tend to find ourselves in the education world, but I'm guessing it's most of us, that once we hit a certain phase in our life, that we've lived through certain things, that we've experienced certain things, we've gathered a core set of knowledge or wisdom,
Hmm.
that one of the greatest things we can do is give that back. It fills me up in almost no other way than anything else does, is being able to talk to especially younger people coming up, and to be like, I would love to help support you and give you some tools and help help you dodge some of those viper pits that I had to jump into, right? And
Right.
to avoid those landmines and so forth, so that you can navigate life in a more holistic way and maybe give your gifts more readily than maybe what I was. Right now, one of the things I'm focused on, and I spent about a dozen years at the university and doing this across the nation actually, and some internationally as well, is around generations in the workforce. And right now, we've got 5 generations in the workforce for the first time in history, or at least in recorded history.
Yeah.
And we're really different people, especially the millennials and Gen Z. And we want to believe that if these younger generations would only be as good as what we are, then the world would be going to hell in a handbasket. And I use a quote from, I believe it's Aristotle that talks about, it's a quote where he's basically saying that, the children don't stand up, they don't respect, they don't do these things, they don't work, they don't do these things. Like, this is from 2,500 years ago. So this is these generational things. They said that, our predecessors, our previous generation said it about our generation when we were young, that we were going to be the demise because we couldn't, we aren't grounded, we don't work the same way, we don't have the same values. This is something that's going on probably since the beginning of time. So what I like to bring, especially to small and mid-sized businesses, are some tools to help navigate the waters of what, especially as the millennials and Generation Z, how do you communicate in this world where it's really different in how they're motivated and what they're looking for, what inspires them, how do you keep them on board, what access do you give them to resources and tools?
Hmm.
So I'm really interested right now in helping mentor businesses to help mentor businesses and again, smaller to mid-sized businesses in these ideas of how do you work through using really emotional intelligence and understanding that there isn't one way of doing things, that we tend to myopically focus on doing things the way that works for us or how we like to be
Right.
taught. So
Hmm.
this becomes really interesting, I believe, for those businesses who, right now there's approximately 53% of the workforce in the United States. I'll caveat with that. In the United States, it's comprised of the millennial and Gen Z. In fact, Gen Z just surpassed the baby boomers as far as the numbers in the workforce.
In the work. Right.
In recent first quarter of the year, or maybe second quarter of 2024. So that's an interesting dynamic in that of itself. And if our corporations, if our businesses, if our places of work don't represent that kind of 53%, then there may be something we want to look at. And most of us will go, and the older generations will say, well, they aren't this, and they want entitlement, and they want, and some of that is true, but we created that in them. We did that. We set the stage for them to be that particular way. So we have a responsibility instead of doing the historic, what we tend to do, which works for the older generations, which are supervise and manage. Jim, you did a good job there, but I'm really not caring. I'm not going to talk to you about what you did well because you know how to do that. You need to help out here, here, and here. You need,
Right.
growth here. And we would go, gotcha, I see where my edge of growth is, and I better shape up or I'm going to be shipped out kind of stuff. That doesn't work. So that kind of like, here's what you're doing wrong, fix it. Instead of the supervising and managing, it really comes to these younger generations of coaching and mentoring.
Right.
And that's a huge
That's a
philosophical
different
switch.
style. Yeah.
It's a huge switch from a leadership standpoint, right? And if
Yeah.
we can get this right, then that means you've got longevity you get a legacy that continues on. Because if you can't bring these younger generations in, your business will tend to die on the vine after a few decades down the road because you don't have people infused with that.
Hmm.
So that's where one of my current passions lies, is in giving back in that way. And so I'm working with some of the workforce centers here in Colorado Springs to do some training. I got training at the end of the month for the hospitality industry. Interestingly enough, for coming from that whole place of having that restaurant that I was building out to now I'm helping coach the HR folks in the restaurant, primarily restaurant and hospitality groups in this. It's an interesting full circle.
Right. Well, it's been my impression, particularly, even in the popular press, that there is a lot of friction between the old style of corporate management, old style HR, and so forth, and an expectation that, well, Gen Z is going to march in here and, you know, follow the rules, follow the trainings, da 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 da. And I think we're hearing that corporate America is a little bit, maybe a decade behind, the new wave of how people relate to each other, how they want to work, what they expect in terms of quality of life, both in and out of work. So it's interesting that you're doing that, and I'm sure it's pretty rewarding seeing change happen.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, sure
is
is.
it is it a shock to the people you train and teach, the corporate group, that this is inevitable?
It's a shock, and it's what's really fascinating for me. And I laugh because I go, well, why do I have to change? Because right? Because
That's a good one.
historically,
Why
right?
should I
How
change? Yeah.
Right, historic is like, man, we take the kidney punches. It was at the entry level. We do the kidney punches. We do we aren't given access. We say yes, sir, yes, ma'am. How much? Hi,
Yeah.
military. Yeah, I know you're military as well. It's like, yeah, you don't ask, Brad. You don't ask why am I doing this. You just do it because asking why is going to get you in a lot of trouble with that. So you just do it, and then you take your hits, and then finally you work yourself far enough up the ladder that you then can start making those decisions and kind of hold the information and the rules, and nobody needs to know, and you're in your little kind of cloistered group of power. And
Yeah.
that's not how it's working with that. So I say to people, it's like, you don't have to change. You don't have to do anything here. But there's a consequence to not changing. There's a consequence to not adapting. And is it
Right.
tough? Absolutely. Is it different? It's radically different way of approaching the work environment. But when you do it right, when you can really lean in and make those changes and be the kind of leader who goes, okay, I get it that it's going to be, if I want to succeed in a way, if I want to be to move forward, not only just for the business but also for the workers, for the staff, right, and bring in those people, and then you've got to think that's just in your intra world, but what about the exterior world or your clientele and stuff? If we've got this turnover, we keep hiring in these millennials or Gen Zs, and they leave after 6 months or a year, the clientele, one of the great things about our clientele is the relationship they have with our staff. So I can think of a half dozen different people who in different industries, whether it's the people down at AutoZone, or I go down and see Rodney, it's like, Rodney, they know me when I walk in there. I know them. There's a
Mhm.
relationship there. Now, if Rodney turns over and leaves, then I've got to start from scratch. It's like, oh, you don't know my vehicle. You don't know my history. You don't know my story. Same as in business. You don't understand my business. You don't understand my unique nuances and stuff. My brother who has a bunch of rental houses, and he's really into numbers and doing things in a really mysterious way. His bankers have turned over 4 times in the last 4 years. He's so frustrated. He's like, I have to explain my story to them every single time. He's like, I'm going to look for a different banker here who has some more stability. And
Right.
that's what's going to happen is you're going to stop having people who have been maybe loyal to your company. They're going to start looking for somewhere who has that relationship that is steady and long term there, because it's part of what we like to know, that people know us when we call up and it's like, hey, I need to talk to Susie or Jimmy or John or
Mhm.
Alexa or whomever it might be, that we know those people and they know us. So yes, it's fascinating when we say it's going to require change, and it's like, what an exciting time. Can you make a change? And those people who are open to that, as we saw during COVID, because we're in this really interesting time frame where disruptive technologies are coming in, AI is throwing all kinds of weird
Sure.
nuances, all these disruptive technologies and situations like COVID are coming about. Those companies who are agile enough to ask the question and be curious about how they can reinvent themselves are more likely to succeed and to have people stay with them through those changes than those who oftentimes what we do during those changes is we constrict, right? We
Right.
pull in our resources. We don't, we hunker down and we cut jobs, and we trim and we constrict. But those who can go look at the opportunities, like, well, okay, we did things this way. What opportunity? Let's open the floor up. Let's get creative here. And what can we do differently that is taking advantage of this new normal? And
Yeah.
those are the businesses that thrive. And there's lots of case studies out there about those who did that during COVID and during following 9/11, those kind of things. They're like, they reinvented themselves and because of that are thriving now.
Right. Right. And smaller businesses, they're a bit more nimble. They're probably more inclined to change before the big businesses, you know, get the message. So
They can, right? They can if they and
yeah, they can.
this is why I want to be able to speak specifically to them because they've got the ability, the agility, like you're saying, they're much more flexible
Right.
typically to be able to do that. Now, sometimes, it feels like, no, I'm going to do it my way and only this way. It's like, ooh, okay. But
Okay.
they typically have the ability they do have oftentimes that ability to flex more than following all this corporate policy and, the big ship that's really hard to steer versus the dinghy that you can, turn fairly quickly.
Right. Right. Well, great. So do you do this as on-site trainings or is this online available material? How does that work?
Great question. So I do both actually, Jim. So I'm doing some online or some in person right now with different, again, in the kind
Hmm.
of in the region. But what I'm in the process of doing right now is putting together an 8 to 12 week online program that really steps through. First, we go through the very first kind of module, if you will, is going through a definition of the generations, how we were forged, what created our generations and how we typically think and do things.
Right.
And then we get into really talking about how do we advertise for positions for some of these millennials and Gen Zs? How do we onboard them? What are they looking for? What are the different? So I've got a whole like 50 different items of how do each of the five generations like to be communicated with? What
Mhm.
motivates us? What inspires us? What are we looking for? How do we like to be evaluated? How do we like to be on? So there's about 50 items that they're broken down by generation that kind of like a little cheat sheet touchstone of going, oh, okay, I'm meeting with this person now. There's a likelihood that they are going to respond best if I approach them in this way.
Right.
And one of the key things I talk about at the end of my presentation, so forth, is be very, very, very careful of sticking somebody in a box by their age, right? By what, because statistics are group oriented and
Sure.
individuals not statistics. And so
Right.
you can have somebody who would theoretically be in the millennial age group but really act like a boomer or a traditionalist or a Gen Xer, and so forth. But that being said, we get into talking through the generalities of going, what do typically the millennials and the Gen Zs want? The Gen Zs are really different than the millennials.
Hmm.
Um, they've got a lot of mental health concerns for the Gen Zs because they've gone through COVID, they've gone through 9/11, they've gone through the whole thing of the climate change and people telling them that they aren't going to have a world to live into. They've gone through where school shootings are a norm now, which is crazy. That's the world that they grew up in. So they've got a lot of mental challenges. So how do you structure an environment that that takes care of that and that you show as a company that you're interested in their mental well-being, which for the older generations, I mean, that was like, nobody talks about, you just kind of stuff that down, right? And don't talk about that at all,
Right.
especially in the military. If you talk about that in the military, you're on a fast track out, basically. So nobody talks about mental health at all. You just like, man.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
and we get those issues, but these younger generations, that's an important thing to them, as is diversity, which is an interesting thing. About 25% of the Gen Z identify as LGBTQ plus on that spectrum with that. So that's really bizarre to our older generations as well. So if you're in your work environment talking about, being disparaging to that, you're going to push off a large group of people that could be very good employees for you.
Right.
So there's lots of news. So I go through 8 weeks of that online. So there's an online program. In fact, I'm starting up a class sometime in August here, Jim. That'll be the next
Oh,
iteration.
cool. Yeah.
We go through and I bring in the business and we actually sit down in each of these meetings. I'll do a short segment of training based on that, and then we'll get in and go bring forth let's see some of your job applications and where are the faults with this. Let's evaluate our job. Let's talk about how we would structure that differently for these different groups. Let's talk about onboarding. What are you doing? What's your process look like? How are you making this even the advancement? How do people advance? Because for those older generations, like, I'm just kind of glad I got a job. mean, I'm at the university. I had the same level job as I started 16 years ago. It was exactly the same level as when I finished 16 years later. There's
Yeah.
no upward mobility per se, other than I went from, from the instructor to master, whatever, to the final piece. I got some bumps along that way to master instructor with that, but it was different than really getting different ranks. Like the military was nice about giving you rank, but they want some acknowledgement and changes faster with things, which we look at as entitlement. But for them, because of the way they move through school and their reward system and
Mhm.
those kind of things, is what they're used to and what they're anticipating.
Right.
So how do we meet that? How do we change things and look at that in a different way? So it's about getting into the muck and just being vulnerable in that and going, okay, here's what I've got. What do you guys think? Let's evaluate our models and how we're doing these onboarding and how we're doing training and how we're doing evaluations and how we're doing even and the piece I love the most, I think, Jim, one of the really clever, I won't say clever, but interesting things is usually when we have our younger folk leave, where it's like, God darn it, they jumped over to the competition. I'm upset with you. And I put all this invested in you here, and then you jump to the competition. And so we act as a burning bridge. What I say is we know our younger people are going to be jumping jobs. That's part of we know the modeling is out there that they're jumping jobs to get experience and so forth. They started with Generation X.
Yes.
So we
They
know
will.
they're going to do that. So
Yeah.
if they're a good employee, if they've got potential, once they leave, stay in contact with them.
Hmm.
Stay in contact. Say, hey, we've got this job coming out. I know that you said you wanted to move. This opportunity is here. We'd love to have you come and interview for it if it's something that fits your current desire. Because what's that telling them? That you're interested in them, that you find value in them, which is way different than the way it's like, no, you come to us, we're not going to go to you. But again, boy, if they've been with your company and you know that they're, a potential rising star, how hard is it to get good employees? Pretty hard sometimes. So
Yeah.
if you know you've got a diamond in the rough there, it may be who has to reach back out. So anyway, these online courses and what we're doing is we're able to do this from across the world, if you will, and get in there and get messy and talk through this and give real life examples and then hopefully I'm creating a plan with them step by step of what they can then implement at the end of this 8 weeks, 8 to 12 weeks, depending on if they want
Yeah.
different modules and stuff to come
That's
in there.
exciting, Mark. Let us know when that actually finally comes out. That'd be
Yeah,
great.
yeah, I'll do that. I've got
Really
the
good.
yeah,
So
yeah.
why don't you let the audience know here what your contact points are and that sort of thing, so that they can reach out to you.
Yeah, right now the bet, because I've again after 16 years of being at the university, I'm so used to having the mark.platten at colorado-state.edu, which is not the case anymore. So the best way to reach me is really at my old Gmail account, which is Mark MARKJ, as in Joseph, which is my middle name, Platten, all one word, at gmail.com. So markjplatten at gmail.com is the best way to reach out to me with that. I will be putting stuff out on my website and stuff specifically around this course
Yeah.
as we get close to the end of the month here.
And as the website, the Alexander Platten Associates, is that what we should look for?
It's going to change here, I think, Jim. I'm
Ah,
sorry. I mean, this is that place of reinventing myself again, right? So
okay.
I hadn't anticipated. It's actually this. I hadn't even thought about doing this as a program and course because I've done it as a 1.5 hour kind of program, usually for industry or nonprofits
Hmm.
or academia for the last 12 years. There's never been something I've done in it, but it's like somebody, an HR person here in Colorado Springs said, "Well, would you do this as a course?" Like, oh my gosh, what? How have I been so myopic that I haven't? I mean, this makes all this. Yes, of course I can put this into the course format and do this
Sure.
online. So I'm still in the business of identifying the business that I'm going to be doing this under, Jim. So
Okay.
it
Well, not to put pressure on you, but let us know when it happens
it will
and
definitely be soon.
we'll get that out, help you get that out.
Appreciate
So
it.
listen, Mark, this is really exciting stuff you're doing. I think you bring a really great view of life's ups and downs and carry that forward to help other folks. And I'm sure Colorado Springs especially is happy to have you there to do that for them.
Well,
So,
I sure hope so.
and thank you for joining us today on Vision in Action Live. And maybe we'll be able to see you again here.
I'd love to do that, Jim. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. So I want to thank our guest today, Mr. Mark Platten. It was a pleasure having him, and he had some tremendous insights. Look forward to what he has to tell us down the road. And thank you very much for attending our Vision in Action Live session today. Our podcasts are every week, and they include important personal development material from lifelong fulfillment and interviews with subject matter experts and people that are already leading self-directed lives. Thanks for tuning in. Check out the newsletter and details of the podcast and the lifelong fulfillment materials and this podcast itself on lifelongfulfillment.com. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Goodreads, several other podcasts, and amongst them, Jackie Woodside most recently. And I'm Jim Boswell. I'm your host. Comments and questions can be addressed to us on the podcast or the book, and they're welcome at the website and Jim at lifelongfulfillment.com. We thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again on another episode of Vision in Action Live. Till then, have a great time.